Through his demeanor, actions, and presence, he presented himself to others, turning to speech as a last resort, not because he couldn't find the right words, but because there were not nearly enough of them to express the great depth of his understanding or feeling.
So you want to talk about action when it comes to the book. Of course, you want to know about that. I think action in a novel can be hard. It can be hard because, you have to you have to design the scene to where it's going to, one, focus the reader where you want the focus to be, because unlike film or television or some type of visual medium to where you can see, a director can say, I want to have a specific shot of somebody getting kicked or punched or this happening. You can't do that on the page. The reader can really only see one thing at a time as you present them in words. You can set the scene and everything, but it can be a little bit tricky. So I knew that early on, I wanted the action sequences in the book to depict some of my favorite types of action and that I like in any medium that I consume. So video games, movies, things like that. So it takes a lot of work to get it right on the page, and it was a real challenge for me. It was something that I approached kind of with caution, because even in my writings, like in my journals, I hadn't really done much action writing, So it was kind of a new frontier for me. So as I mentioned in the previous session, the novel was heavily inspired by JRPGs, or Japanese role-playing games. And in a typical JRPG, battles are a huge part of the main experience. Players can spend dozens of hours grinding to increase their stats through battles, especially in some of those old school RPGs, random encounters. Oh my God. Those of you who know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about old school RPGs. Key story points often play out with battles. So it's a big part of the experience. And it's the same way with Cereus Limnic. A lot of the action in the novel was inspired from three main sources. It's Japanese anime, American kind of action sequences, and actually Chinese dramas. And then there's one actual fourth category that I'll go into more later in the session. But those are the main categories of action in Cereus and Limnic. So first I'll start by talking about the anime influence, Japanese culture, because I think I mentioned a while back that I used to live in Japan, and when I was in the military, and I talked about how my degree was, it's Asian studies, so I had a minor in Japanese, so I was exposed to a lot of Japanese culture back when I was younger. So even though I was exposed to Japanese culture a lot, I'm still not like a huge fan of anime, like especially now. Like anime is everywhere now. I mean, Netflix is pumping them out. You can just go online, go on YouTube. It's kind of been exported to different, I know there's a bunch of American companies that do like anime style influence, Avatar, The Last Airbender. There was this one, I forget what it's called, on Netflix. It was like a Mexican influence, but it was very anime heavy. I watched it last year. I can't remember the name, but it was like, they were like Kung Fu, the three friends. They were all martial artists, and I thought it was really cool. Very anime influence, but really good. So bottom line is anime is kind of everywhere nowadays. You don't really have to watch pure Japanese anime to get the influence. But yeah, I've never been like a huge fan of it. And I think that surprises some people when they meet me personally, knowing, especially after you read Cereus and Limnic, you'll see that it does borrow some of the style of action of anime, or just some of the characters, some of the poses, some of the story beats. It's very anime. Of course, it's inspired by JRPGs, and JRPGs are inspired by anime as well. So that's not to say I don't like anime, but it's just that I don't go out of my way to actively watch it. So in the end, I think fans of uh, Japanese anime and culture and that kind of style will definitely relate to what I've put into the novel in Cereus and Limnic. So the next style of action that I talked about, that I alluded to in the beginning, in the intro, was the American style of action, which, you know, we're Americans, so we like our guns. Like a lot of countries overseas, they're not as gun crazy as we are. But yeah, man, people are gun crazy over here, and I'm a fan of guns as well. In the military, of course, I've shot my fair share of firearms, so I know my way around a couple of different weapons, and I definitely put that into the novel. I think in the future, I think in a lot of science fiction, you see stuff with lasers and things like that. I have to admit, I'm not very original when it comes to the type of weaponry that I put into the novel. There's lasers, but then of course there's still conventional firearms, right? You've got M4s, you've got, yeah, I feel like those things are still around in the future. I feel like they're not going anywhere. I mean, what are you going to do with all these rounds, right? There's a ton of them. There's millions of rounds of ammunition, so I think they're still going to be around. But I have a military component to the novel, which I'll talk about in a later session, more about how my military experience influenced certain characters and certain scenarios. But action-wise, there's definitely that style of gunplay, and there's a particularly huge battle scene that I won't spoil, of course, but it's very military style, a la like Saving Private Ryan or things like that. It's a conventional military battle. So I grew up on a lot of those movies, and of course, being a military veteran myself, I'm just kind of familiar with how certain battles need to be arranged and things like that. And it was a fun scene to write too, because I actually mapped out the battle. I kind of made positions and things like that. It was like playing Risk. For those of you familiar, the board game. So it was a lot of fun to construct that particular scene in there. But I think fans of that style of action will be in for a pleasant surprise. So I can't remember if I mentioned on this podcast or not that I'm actually learning Mandarin Chinese right now. I'm actively learning, like I'm using Skritter Chinese pretty much every day and learning, I don't know, just 4 or 5 new characters every day, but I'm also reviewing older ones, right? And I've been doing this. I kind of started it as a pandemic activity, but I've really picked it up and my skills have really grown. I took some lessons on italki with a tutor. Yeah, shout out to Billy if you're listening, but yeah, so it's been a lot of fun. So part of that Chinese, education, self-education has been watching Chinese dramas. So I started maybe last year watching them. So it was new to me. I didn't grow up watching Chinese dramas, grew up in Texas that just weren't around. But now they've become a lot more easy to access with streaming services and such. So the deal with Chinese dramas is, I feel like it's very, because like I just mentioned, I grew up in college, I was watching anime and, being in Japanese culture and being exposed to it. Going to Chinese culture, there's definitely some overlap with the styles, but there's a couple of different nuances the way Chinese dramas handle action. It's a lot more, it's hard to describe, but there's just a flowiness to it. Like a lot of things in Chinese culture, there's just kind of there's an art to it that, I mean, it's there in anime, but it's not as emphasized as it is in Chinese drama. So I wanted to bring some of that to Cereus and Limnic. There's not as much, but it's there, and I've really just kind of fallen in love with the medium. I mean, my wife and I have probably watched over a dozen Chinese dramas since last year. It's really fun, just getting to share that with her. Some are silly, some are really dramatic, some are really emotional and impactful, and I've been kind of influenced. That's probably been the style of action that I've been watching and keeping up with most in the last few years is these Chinese dramas, and there's been more and more of them thanks to Netflix and Amazon and things like that. They've been coming to the US. So I think if you like, bottom line is, if you like Chinese dramas, you'll find some of that in here as well. I won't spoil anything in particular, but I think you're in for a treat when you read the novel. So I alluded to a fourth category of action in the novel, in the intro of this session, and that action is in the form of actually debates. It's not, I guess, some people wouldn't consider it action at all, but I do, and this is a huge part of the story for me because, like I said, I think I've repeated it in several sessions that I'm a teacher at the end of the day, and I want people to walk away thinking about something after having read this novel. I hope they have a good time. I hope they enjoy it. But at the end of the day, the point of me writing it was to kind of bring awareness to certain issues and certain thoughts, certain ideological arguments. So, and using that word, that's how the battles, and I'm using air quotes over here, you can't see me, but that's how the battles come up. It's kind of these arguments, or I don't want to call them arguments, it's debates between certain characters on different issues. So I thought this would be a good way to build tension in a different way than just conventional fighting action. And I think it worked. I think some of the scenes, some of the people that have read already the novel have said those are some of the strongest scenes, where we have one of the main characters, actually the antagonist, his name is Janus. He kind of has this extreme viewpoint when it comes to certain things involving capitalism, involving media and things like that. So he really pushes that on a lot of the characters, and he'll end up in these kind of battles where they're talking about these issues. So I think it was a good way to present the issues, to build character, and to build tension at the same time. So I hope readers really get a lot out of those scenes. I have to admit, I was kind of influenced when I was writing this by the Phoenix Wright games. I don't know if you're familiar with the Phoenix Wright games, but essentially Phoenix Wright is a lawyer. So the games involve him, his involvement in various criminal cases. So the whole point of the game is to get Phoenix Wright to solve the case. But you're a lawyer, so a lot of the action takes place in the courtroom. And just like any lawyer, you have access to case files and evidence and photographs and all these different things, and you have to kind of I'm laughing because I'm thinking of the game. The game is really funny. If you've never played these games, go and check it out. I think they've put it on Switch recently, but because they have these, it's known for its kind of these quirky characters, and Phoenix Wright himself is very quirky, but the characters, like the people involved with the cases, are very quirky. So as you go through a trial sequence, you kind of have this questioning phase where they start out, maybe they don't know much, maybe they're lying to you, this and that, and as you kind of escalate and get further along in each case, I was just laughing. You have to go play one of these games. You'll see the characters just kind of, they do this goofy thing. They start sweating. They start like cursing you. They start, it's like a boss battle. Like you're about to defeat them as, as you build your case and as you gain credibility. I mean, it's from the same people who make the Street Fighter franchise, who made it originally, Capcom. So they even throw some of the sound effects in there. It's really funny. But my point is that I was really kind of channeling this style of action when I was writing Cereus Limnic, that you will kind of have this tension as somebody builds their argument, as somebody kind of loses stamina, if you will, as the debate goes on, then you'll see that that's how a lot of the action takes place. And I thought that would be a cool way to put it into the novel. So as you can see, action takes many different forms in the novel. I combine Asian and American action sequences along with debates in order to entertain the reader while still making them consider the issues that are on display in the novel. So yeah, what are some of the issues? Of course, I'll just say a few. Technology, kind of this philosophical argument about humanism, capitalism, of course, and how all these things affect us as people and as humans. And while some of this stuff might seem like, oh, who cares about that? What does it matter to me? I think it matters a lot right now because, one of the big themes in the book is AI, artificial intelligence, and I feel like it's already here. People are waiting for the Skynet and the Terminator thing, but it's not going to be that. Right now I'm reading a book by an Air Force Academy classmate of mine. His name is Michael Kanan. I think it's Michael Kanan. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it right, but I'm reading his book right now called T-AI. I have it in my hands. And it's a really good book that talks about the background, the foundations, and just kind of the future of artificial intelligence in just around the world. And he talks about how important it is for everyday people, not just artificial intelligence engineers or people that are programming this stuff, but everyday people to understand what artificial intelligence is and how it could and will affect their lives in the future. I feel like it is already affecting us, but it's going to affect us so much more than we could ever imagine. And we need to have firm who we are as people to make sure that when we're designing these systems, when we're coding them for the things that we want them to do for us, that they are used to their maximum benefit, that they're not programmed for implicit bias or racism or, to be against certain people and better for others. Like, we need to make sure that we're prepared for that future. So I know it's pretty heavy stuff, but it's also very important because right now there are people as I speak, as you listen to this, that are designing and programming those algorithms and machines of the future that are going to dictate how our lives play out in a major way. So of course, none of these, artificial intelligence, all this stuff, none of these things are easy to think about or really solve. You don't really solve them, because they're always kind of evolving as far as issues, but you understand them and then you get ahead of them. And I think that makes the future better for all of us, or it will. So through the debates, through the action, my intent was to have the readers think about maybe which characters that they relate to as far as what side of the argument they're on, and maybe think about not what side, but how they want to think about the issue. Just like I say to my students all the time in my math class, like, the important thing is to think. It's not to necessarily get the answer right, but it's to think about what it is that, what it is we're studying. In my math class, it's math, but in the case of Cereus and Limnic, the issues are a little bit deeper than that. It's all about the lesson in the end, and I hope that readers walk away thinking about these issues, because like it or not, they will affect how the world of the future will be constructed, which means it indirectly affects them as well.
Music for the Cereus and Limnic podcast was provided by Ryan Fonger. For more information about Cereus and Limnic, visit keithhayden.net and subscribe or follow @kh_author on Twitter. For future episodes, subscribe and follow the Cereus and Limnic podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, as well as the Amazon Music app.